This may come as a surprise to many of you, but the release of Marvel's Spider-Man 2 snuck up on me. I wasn't ready. I picked the game up on release day, but held off on playing it for nearly 2 additional weeks. The game sat on my shelf, still in its packaging, all that time. I was just having far too much fun capturing and writing scripts for some other games I plan on making videos on in the coming weeks and months, that playing a new Spider-Man game wasn't all that crucial to me. I guess I have the complete opposite of what you would call FOMO. I think I have more patience, restraint, and discipline than anyone I know. I find I have the same level of excitement playing older games I never have before, sometimes released decades ago, that I do the newest ones on the latest consoles. Maybe I'm an old soul with these kinds of things. I look at video games differently, especially as I've gotten older. I didn't expose myself to too much of the marketing for Spider-Man 2. I was out of the loop with it, which probably didn't help matters. I think I watched some of the early trailers. I knew Kraven and Venom were going to be in it, possibly even Mysterio, but that's about it. Because I was so preoccupied with those other projects I've been working on, I didn't give the game a chance to pump me up, which I guess is kind of unfair to it. But of course, I have since played it and want to discuss it with you all today. As I do with all of my superhero game reviews on my channel, I want to go heavy into spoilers. I am a fan of the comic books, first and foremost, after all. If I don't go into spoilers, making this kind of content wouldn't be fun or feel meaningful to me. If all you want is a watered-down and simplistic opinion piece, go watch any of the pre-release or immediate post-release stuff from the major gaming journalists. That's not me, though. Never will be. However, before I do get into any spoilers a little later in this video, I will say that while the game is action-packed from start to finish, features a lot of grand and memorable set pieces, and either met or exceeded my expectations with the depiction of its characters, it is, without a doubt, one of the best superhero games ever made. I don't think Marvel's Spider-Man 2 reached the same emotional heights that the first game did. The climax of the game was epic, but did feel a bit more lackluster in comparison to the outstanding one in the original. The strongest final act I think any of these superhero games have ever had. The story of Spider-Man 1 felt a lot more self-contained. Spider-Man 2's leaves things on more of a cliffhanger. I think we need the next part of this story to tie everything together and have that full perspective. I found the ending of Spider-Man 2 good, but it definitely left me wanting more. I wasn't as satisfied with it as I was when I beat the first game. Some of the story aspects might be lacking in Spider-Man 2 compared to its predecessor, but something it does exceed in is its gameplay, which obviously makes sense. The combat system has been enhanced. I'm glad Insomniac got rid of the individual suit powers from the previous game. Show of hands, how many of us actually used more than one or two of them? In their place are special attacks attached to the L1 button. I found Miles' Venom abilities in his game to be too easy to earn, making them extremely overpowered by the end. Here, the special attacks are given cooldowns, and the focus meters are now solely for healing and performing takedown finishers. I think this allows the combat to flow much better while still providing a solid challenge with the stronger enemy types. You can't always plow through them like you did before. Miles' special attacks revolve around his Venom powers. The yellow ones are the same as before, but he also develops these cool blue ones as well, which I found myself using exclusively in this game just to switch things up. Peter makes use of 4 iron spider-like mechanical arms that come out of the back of his suit, and I'd like to believe the technology is at least partly inspired by Doc Ock's arms in the first game. The gimmicky individual suit powers are gone in Spider-Man 2, but both Peter and Miles have mega attacks you activate by pressing R3 and L3 when the meter prompts you to. They are insane to look at, incredibly powerful, essentially screen-clearing moves. I love how simple it is to access both the special attacks and gadget attacks in combat by holding down L1 or R1 along with the associated face button assigned to each. Honestly, I rarely used any of the gadgets, maybe in a few of the tougher enemy encounters. Bosses and the sonic bursts were very helpful against large swarms of symbiotes late in the game, but I had the most fun using the combinations of special attacks. Once they were all fully leveled up, their cooldowns were manageable and kept the action engaging by themselves. One bizarre addition to the combat was the parry mechanic for enemy attacks that are unblockable by regular means. I don't think the game needed it. I also feel every attack should be counterable, given the fact that both Peter and Miles have a spider sense. It's weird that it would just go off, and even though they have superhuman reflexes, they have to essentially take the full force of the blow. I don't play many games that used a parry system. I still haven't mastered it in Spider-Man 2. I'm pretty terrible, which is why I tried to never give my opponents the chance to use those attacks in the first place, but I found if they did, the parry could be easily cheesed. Mashing the button down usually worked 90% of the time. The stealth areas play out the same as they did before, using web strikes and perch takedowns on unsuspecting enemies. There are a few more gadgets you can use. I like the new web line you can shoot out, providing more ways to get above your opponents. Reminds me of the tightrope takedowns from Batman Arkham. The Spider-Bot sections have been expanded, with you searching burning buildings for survivors, for example, or avoiding detection from robbers in a museum. You can now pull down objects, fire energy blasts to clear debris, and jump and hover using R2, so there's a greater emphasis on platforming with it now. The traversal in Marvel Spider-Man 2 is even better than it was before, with more ways to build up and maintain your forward momentum. You can do loop-de-loops to increase your swinging speed by holding R2 and releasing it following a nosedive, which gave me more of a reason to do the dive move in this game. You can slingshot yourself in certain areas to cover lots of ground or go over water. If you hit the surface of the water, you can slide across it temporarily, jumping and web-zipping like a human skipping stone. The biggest inclusion are the web wings, which supposedly were going to be in the first game, but Insomniac phased them out in fear it would be too much for the player at once, so they eased into them over the course of multiple games. At first, I really didn't know what to make of them, flying through the air and going through all of the wind tunnels, doing more gliding than swinging. It didn't feel right in a Spider-Man game. It felt kind of silly, but they quickly grew on me. They became a nice bonus and added more variety to the already superb swinging system. They provide you with a means to keep moving forward when you don't have anything else to latch onto with your web. The traversal in these games is so phenomenal, the best in any Spider-Man game, because of how intuitive it is and the emphasis it places on building and sustaining momentum. Insomniac just get it. The map of New York is bigger than it was in the original game, with the addition of Queens, Brooklyn, and the vibrant Coney Island. It's been a while since Coney Island has been featured in a Spider-Man game. I want to say the 4th generation, but I could be wrong. The map is not to scale, of course, but simply an idealized version of the city with countless landmarks from Marvel Comics. You can switch between both Spider-Mans throughout the story and during side missions. Some have you swapping back and forth automatically, others are exclusively for them, and you can also switch characters when free roaming and doing friendly neighborhood Spider-Man app requests. Speaking of which, I'm so happy that you could assign the app to one of the directional buttons instead of having to awkwardly swipe your finger across the controller. The loading times when switching characters are basically non-existent. Graphically, video games have been taking baby steps the last few generations, but the speed at which these things load up now is truly unbelievable. You can literally zip instantly to any point on the map whenever you want. If you had told my younger self that this would one day be possible, I would have had an aneurysm. Peter and Miles both have a plethora of awesome Spidey suits to unlock. Some return from past games, some are new, some are based on specific comic books and storylines, and others have been made exclusively for the game. I love that each one offers multiple color schemes as well that you can craft. There's so much more customization options available. It's great. Each Spider-Man has his own unique skill tree to advance, as well as a shared tree. With how much this game offers in other areas, I found them to be pretty small, all things considered. I had all three maxed out before the story was finished. Then again, I did focus all of my attention and resources on them over the additional cosmetics, but still, I feel like these trees could have been a little bigger. You earn crafting tokens and tech parts by doing crimes that pop up and completing side objectives. The side missions in Spider-Man 2 are a lot better than they were in the first game. Many still feel like empty busy work, but are capped at reasonable amounts this time, like 9 or 10, so they aren't too painful and exhausting to finish 100%, unlike a lot of those enemy bases, research stations, backpacks, and landmark photographs were from before. These side missions are a lot more manageable, enjoyable, and I guarantee you'll have the vast majority accomplished as you naturally progress through the story. I think there were a lot more side villains and references to other characters from the comics this time around. They had a stronger connection to what was going on in the main story, which made them more engaging. I liked a few of the extra mission chains too, at Vision's Academy, that had you helping that boy ask his date to homecoming, which was cute. There's a fun puzzle involving rooftop lasers set up by science students who hilariously kidnapped the school mascot, Lance the Lion. I loved the missions for the Harlem Culture Center that had Miles uncover the one responsible for stealing a bunch of historical instruments, one of the financial donors who believes he owns the items and not the community. These kinds of down-to-earth missions breathed life into the world and helped counterbalance some of the grander set pieces throughout the game. Some people might find them uninteresting, standard filler, but I like when superhero games do this. Not every part of the job is going to be as exciting as the last. Heroism comes in all shapes and sizes. They keep their ears to the ground in so many ways. And as much as I hated collecting pigeons for that homeless man Howard in the first game, he got an emotional send-off in this one, with you flying through the air, side by side with his pets, to set them free so they could see the world outside the city. Howard sits with you reminiscing about his deceased wife, his past employment, and that the Spider-Men were the only ones who were ever nice to him. When you return, you find that Howard had died of natural causes. It's as if his spirit was with you, carrying those birds away. It was fucking sad. Insomniac tore our hearts out here. It was a beautiful sequence. You know what else was a beautiful sequence? When you got to play as the deaf street artist Haley, the love interest of Miles, and my favorite supporting character from his game. I love how much Spider-Man 2 implemented sign language in its story, how all of her friends used it when talking to her. She even uses text-to-speech on her phone when contacting Miles. It was just so inclusive, so respectful, so realistic. In general, Marvel Spider-Man 2 is one of the most diverse and inclusive games I've ever played. I respect the hell out of it for that. It definitely played a factor in it becoming the highest-selling PlayStation 5 game and the highest-selling first-party title in PlayStation's history. It resonates with people from all walks of life. It shows the world as it truly is. Going back to Haley, when you play as her, there is no sound. It tells its story through the use of emojis and punctuation marks visible above characters' heads. It was brilliant. It's nice to see a developer like Insomniac challenge themselves in this way. I've seen a few assholes complain about it online, saying her section is boring to sit through, but that's just them being ignorant. Have some perspective for once in your miserable life. Hundreds of millions of people worldwide have some sort of hearing impairment. A lot of them have to experience video games and all forms of entertainment we enjoy, like this, every second of every day. What's 5 measly minutes out of yours? Have you ever watched a silent film? Why don't you smarten yourself up and stop whining like a child? It's pathetic. Before I get to the crux of the main story, I want to discuss all of the side villains. I was a little disappointed with the Prowler. I was hoping he'd continue his path as an anti-hero, following Miles' game, and fight some of the new threats in this one alongside his nephew. Instead, what we got was very low stakes, but it did play a significant role in Miles' development, so I can't really complain. In Spider-Man 2, Aaron tries to make amends with his nephew. After all, no matter what happens, they're family. Through his uncle, just like he did in his game, Miles learns more about his father and his upbringing. His uncle also gives him wise words of advice. He says to not let the thought of his father's killer dwell on his mind. It can be a prison in and of itself. Miles seeks revenge in this game, but I'll talk more about that in a bit. Aaron is on parole in Spider-Man 2. His days as the Prowler are officially over. He wants to turn his life around, find balance and peace within himself after everything he's done. At the end of his mission, you find out Miles' mother had co-signed a lease so Aaron could live in the apartment above theirs. Rio has accepted him back into the family, and they can all start healing together now. Anywho, Aaron has Miles locate various tech stashes he has hidden throughout this city, before the other villains can find and use them. It's cool investigating and scanning for the doors to these stashes, but to be honest, I think the way you go about doing it with the PS5 controller is extremely gimmicky. You have to press and hold the L2 and R2 buttons down, finding the sweet spot with their depth. This feature reminds me of the 6-axis stuff from the PS3 generation. It's something that all these games flaunt now, but I'm sure will be completely phased out later. It will lose all its novelty, and developers will realize it adds absolutely nothing to the experience. I also find it weird that a game with so many accessibility options would have something in it that, to my knowledge, can't be turned off, that poses a blatant issue for people with certain physical disabilities. By the time I record this voiceover and have this review out, I hope all of it has been fixed. Let's talk about Yuri and her transformation into the Vigilante Wraith. Honestly, it wasn't what I was hoping for in Spider-Man 2. The setup for the character was made rather dark and gruesome. Yuri Watanabe was a respected NYPD captain who was Spider-Man's ally and main point of contact within the police. In the Turf Wars chapter of the City That Never Sleeps DLC from the first game, her strike team would be murdered by the ruthless gangster Hammerhead in the decrepit Harlem Sanitarium. The lights had gone out when Spider-Man arrived. Yuri shot blindly in the dark, and it was implied that one of her stray bullets may have led to the death of the final officer, the one that had worn the Spider-Man wristwatch from his kid that went against regulation. Tragic. Yuri would be left traumatized from the ordeal. She enacts revenge against Hammerhead, going on a warpath and gunning down several of his men at the bar with no name. After the first fight you have with Hammerhead, Yuri appears, traps Spidey in Sable-Tech coils, and relentlessly shoots at the weakened villain, with one of the shots being directly aimed at his face, point blank, killing him. Hammerhead would be resuscitated shortly thereafter, but it was clear that Yuri, once a good cop, had gone bad. As punishment, Yuri would be forced into administrative leave. During this time, she would place crime recordings for Spider-Man to find all over the city. They were at various murder sites and document a Magia enforcer who had been hired by Hammerhead to find out information on Yuri. He pretended to be a patient to blackmail her therapist. You find out the therapist had been working with Yuri to apprehend the enforcer, but the enforcer found out and had the therapist killed. Yuri would have Spider-Man go to the final crime scene, where it's revealed that she had found and killed the enforcer herself. She tells Spider-Man that the justice system doesn't always work. She enjoyed killing the enforcer and says she will bring balance to the world with her own form of justice. She says her goodbyes, and that's the last we would hear from Yuri for a time. Seeing how bad things had gotten with Yuri, it appeared that she and Spider-Man were on a deadly collision course with one another due to their differing principles. I thought things were going to get violent between them, and fast, but come Spider-Man 2, it was like everything had lightened up. A complete tonal shift had occurred. There was tension between Yuri and Spider-Man, but not as much as there should have been, in my opinion. I'm not that familiar with the Wraith character from the comics. She's relatively new, all things considered, but I was expecting the kind of ideological conflict you'd see between the likes of Batman and the Red Hood, you know? This was not that, nowhere near as provocative. There is a decent fight you have with Wraith inside a burning castle, so Spider-Man does come to blows with her, and they do debate their beliefs a little, but I just felt the two were getting along and joking around with each other far too much in this game. Peter was tolerating what she was doing up to that point, and I began to question his priorities as a hero. I never got a strong sense that her murderous actions bothered him anymore. All that matters is that they're costumed crime-fighting pals now. Peter, Miles, and Yuri can beat up bad guys on the street and have a good laugh. Who cares what she does to criminals in the darkest of alleys? It's like the game was afraid to have its characters address it, couldn't offer an effective resolution to what had been previously established, so it distracted you with eye candy, a new costume, mask, weapon, and oh yeah, a shorter haircut. Though I found the payoff to Yuri's arc so far to be a bit tame and unsatisfying, I did enjoy what the game had you doing for her side mission. Spider-Man and Wraith team up to track down an arsonist cult led by a man known only as the Flame. The Flame intends to bring about the Crimson Hour. His plan is to blow up Brooklyn. His cult followers succeed in derailing an Oscorp train, even with Spider-Man and Wraith's interference, and he pours gasoline onto Spider-Man as he's pinned beneath it, leaving him to burn to death. Jesus! I didn't recognize this Flame character from the comic books, though it may or may not be an obscure reference to a lesser-known Dazzler villain from the 1980s, but something about his unhinged demeanor and the look of death in his eyes was deeply unsettling and felt oddly familiar. The game gave a lot of screen time to this man that I knew there had to be something more to him under the surface. The Flame's true identity is revealed to be that of Cletus Cassidy. He's after a red symbiote Oscorp had acquired and intends to use it to create carnage. This revelation, as obvious as fuck as it is in hindsight, did take me off guard in my initial playthrough, because I didn't think the seeds of carnage would be planted in the same game Venom was to be introduced. I also felt that choosing an arsonist as the host of Carnage would be counterintuitive, seeing as so many versions of the character have had one of the symbiote's main weaknesses be fire, but of course, symbiotes can evolve. They can build up tolerances to both sound and fire, which never really hurts them for that long anyways. And keep in mind, Insomniac can make their own rules. It's their universe. They can do whatever the fuck they want with it, so long as it meets any mandates set by Marvel. But I am curious to see where this incarnation of Cletus Cassidy Carnage goes. While he eludes capture in this game, I'm sure he's going to play a larger role in the next one. I think there's a lot of potential to bring about an entirely new and original version of this character outside the comics. While Carnage is incredibly popular, I don't think there's been many successful layered attempts at fully realizing him in mainstream media. He's been too violent to adapt in a lot of the cartoons. His live-action debut was severely hindered by a PG-13 rating and cringy dialogue. I think the best attempt we've had in recent years was in the Amazing Spider-Man 2 tie-in game. It made Cletus a serial killer. He viewed him and Spider-Man as kindred spirits. You have to team up with Kraven the Hunter to track him down, and it ends with a battle against Carnage at Ravencroft Prison, after Cassidy had been experimented on with a nanite serum. The game has glaring issues, but it made a decent attempt at reinvigorating Cletus as a character, and I'm sure it walked so this game and Marvel Spider-Man 3 could run. Everyone probably wants to hear my thoughts on Insomniac's take on Mysterio, seeing as he is my favorite villain in all of comics. I will say this, while not the ideal version of Mysterio I see in my head, usually more in line with his earlier decades in comics, or the one from the animated series from the 90s, it's probably the best we've ever had in video games at least. I do like what Insomniac did with him here. It's something we haven't seen before. Quentin Beck has reformed and has opened up a series of virtual reality entertainment kiosks all across New York called Mysteriums that Miles quickly discovers have been trapping people inside. To save them, you have to complete various combat challenges, clearing a room without getting hit, or beating a certain number of enemies, or performing a set number of finishers within a time limit. I like the visuals in the virtual reality arenas. You do a lot of zany things. The first one has Miles wearing a Mysterio-esque costume, inputting button prompts like a DJ. You fight members of the Inner Demons on a dance floor, even seeing a few visions of Martin Lee. Some have evil-looking skull dudes and are set in graveyards. When you do end up fighting Mysterio, that's cool too. I think Nasir Dalal does a great job voicing him. He also provided his likeness. His face turns into a ghastly skull when under the bulb helmet. You get stuck in a snow globe with the giant-sized villain looking down at you. There's a sequence where you're swinging and gliding through an upside-down New York, one where you're tricked with an infinitely looping circular hallway. One part has what I believe are torn-out pieces of Coney Island. I don't really like Mysterio's costume in this game though, just a suit jacket and scarf. I would have preferred a cape and more traditional costume, though it is much better than the bulky design he had in Shattered Dimensions. I've always hated that one. You find out through development diaries on USBs you get at each of the kiosks that Beck had partnered with two women to create his Mysteriums, named Betsy and Cole. They had taken advantage of Beck's villain persona and used Mysterio as a marketing tool to sell the technology, which they have been using to steal credit card information from its users. Beck finds out and is naturally upset. He believes there is more value in his own talents than those of Mysterio. Mysterio wouldn't even exist without his genius, but the women plan to have Beck take the fall if their thievery was uncovered. They also made it appear to Spider-Man that Beck had been going back to his criminal ways, and was the shady one. It's honestly really slimy. You feel bad for the guy. Beck genuinely wanted to move on with his life, but finds it increasingly difficult to escape his past. Beck believes Mysterio will always be a villain, but says when you look under the mask, that's when things get messy. We're left with hope. Mysterio may be a bad guy, but I don't think Quentin Beck is anymore. Insomniac must have heard my complaints about that chameleon tease in the first game, because they brought him into this one. There's a side mission that has you locate cloaked transmitters on rooftops and chase down Hunter Hawk drones with your web wings. You have to stay in the path they've created long enough to hack into their satellite network. Kraven has been using them to find a specific target, decoding several messages. You know that Kraven isn't proud of this hunt, and that it's been a stain on his legacy. You learn that all of the targets he and his hunters have been tracking down have been dead, some for several years. Spider-Man begins to wonder if they are even real people. When you eventually reach the home of the target, you find it swarming with hunters. After taking them all out, inside, you move a chess piece into checkmate, and a secret door opens up, leading to a basement lair. I like how there are paintings without faces on the walls, classic suits, and various masks. You realize that Kraven's elusive target is his Master of Disguise half-brother, Dmitry Smerdyakov, the Chameleon, who had recently broken out of prison. Thinking Spider-Man is Kraven, a booby trap in the Chameleon's lair is activated, and poison gas is released. Spidey thankfully escapes, and the Chameleon watches him from afar, promising he will do what Kraven never could, kill Spider-Man. Just like Carnage, I'm intrigued to see what Insomniac will do with this character moving forward if he is to be included in a third game. As many of you are probably aware of already, Chameleon was the first supervillain Spider-Man ever faced in the comics. Even though he was the first, he has always been far from the best, not really being given much of a chance to shine. He's had a few decent stories, but none have ever been standout spectacular. I think having him be a major player in a AAA superhero game would do wonders for his mainstream credibility. I know he's going to be featured in that Kraven the Hunter movie, part of Sony's Spider-Man universe of films, but all of those have been garbage thus far. I'm not hopeful it will be any different. Alright, so let's analyze the main story of Marvel's Spider-Man 2, and I'll share my thoughts on things as we go. Like I said at the beginning of this video, while the game has some memorable character depictions in it, and sequences of intense balls-to-the-wall action, I don't think it reaches the same emotional heights that its predecessor did. I don't think its narrative is as strong. I don't think the final hours of its climax are as strong. I'm not trying to bash it in any way, but as advanced as Spider-Man 2 is from a technical standpoint, I don't think it's the best Spider-Man game ever released. It's the second best, and I mean that's still very impressive at the end of the day, given the sheer quality of the hero's video game library. This shit is stacked and has been so for several decades now. Spider-Man 2 is set nearly a year after the events of Spider-Man 1. Peter Parker is starting his first day as physics teacher at Brooklyn Vision's Academy, where his close friend Miles Morales attends. In fact, Miles is in his class, which is kinda awkward. The game begins with this huge set piece. The city is attacked by Flint Marko, the Sandman, and Peter and Miles are forced to bail on class and apprehend him. I'm not the first, nor will I be the last, to give praise to the game's opening. Visually, I think this is the best version of Sandman we've ever had. How the grand battle is structured is very cinematic. I love how there's a constant sandstorm reducing visibility. You get thrown into an office building and have to dodge Sandman's multiple hands that grab for you. The smaller copies of Marko are great too, with how they climb over, claw at, and overwhelm Peter. He gets knocked to the ground at one point and is pulled into the sand by a bunch of hands, which is an eerie visual. Fortunately, Miles is there to save his butt. I think my favorite parts of this are when you play as Miles, though. There's a lot of cool little details, like when you mash Sandman's face in with debris. I love how the heat from your electrical Venom powers turns areas of his body you strike into glass. The same thing happens to the smaller copies too, freezing them in place. Sandman tries to shake Miles into his mouth and eat the poor boy. He forms a bunch of sand tornadoes, but is ultimately defeated when Miles gives Peter's mechanical arms a boost with his Venom, cutting the villain in two. After taking out Sandman, he doesn't appear again for the rest of the game, which might disappoint some, but I think the intro with him was so strong that he didn't need to come back. You do get a side mission, though, that has you search the city for fragments of his memories, and take on a few leftover copies of himself. In the end, you put all of the fragments together to form a small statue of Marco and his daughter Kimia, which you leave for her on her doorstep. It's a touching little moment. The last fragment you found had taken you into Sandman's mind. You come to understand that he had been making a genuine effort to put his days as a criminal behind him and reconnect with his estranged family, but his actions were forcefully put into motion in this game by someone else who is coming for him, which you realize a little later is Kraven the Hunter. I love how in the aftermath of the Sandman battle, the buildings and streets in that part of the city are covered with sand. During the cleanup, the Spider-Mans have to save a VIP who is stuck in a limo. The VIP turns out to be J. Jonah Jameson, and this is the first time in the series where we see his actual face, not during a podcast and not dressed as Santa Claus with his back turned. As Miles, you carry Jonah to the hospital to treat his injuries. When he regains consciousness mid-swing, he starts yelling for help and saying that the Spider-Mans are abducting him. It's priceless.
Where am I? Spider-Man!
Jonah, my sunshine, you okay?
Help! I've been abducted!
What? No, I'm helping you, man!
Someone get a photo with this! Mass criminals kidnap beloved newsman!
For abandoning his students during a time of crisis, Peter is fired from Vision's academy by the principal. It may seem harsh, but then again, you can't really blame her. Peter doesn't have a good explanation for his absence. Regardless, he is devastated by his termination. He had been excited about the job and what it could bring him in the future. He also needs the money, a stable source of income. He lives in his Aunt May's old home in Queens now that she is gone, and he's behind on payments. Aunt May does have a cameo in this game within a flashback, showing her enter Peter's room after he punches a hole in the wall, listening to Jameson lie about Spider-Man being a menace on the radio. May tells Peter about balance, how it's a process, not a destination, and that you can never take too many things on alone. And this is the central theme of the game. Even though there are two Spider-Mans, they both find themselves taking on too much responsibility without asking anyone for help. I don't want to talk too long about this, so I will make it brief, but I still don't like the face change for Peter. I found it even more distracting this time around. It's laughable to think that this kid has been actively Spider-Man for close to a decade. His juvenile appearance makes him look younger than Miles. It's a detriment to the kind of mentor-student relationship they've been building between them in these games. It has lost a lot of the emotional weight and believability it had. I'm taken out of it most of the time, and a lot of their dialogue falls flat too. It's less convincing, and to be honest, I think the new face looks more robotic and less expressive than the original one too. He looks more like a plastic doll now. I also hate how in the flashbacks in Spider-Man 2, Peter looks far too similar to Tom Holland in the MCU. I think any sort of distinction this version of Peter Parker had before is now gone, diluted. He doesn't even look like the same person. He's become an unremarkable cliche. Anywho, at May's former house, Mary Jane meets up with Peter. I think in Spider-Man 2, she's turned into a bit more of a Mary Sue. She's made more formidable against criminals, having been trained in combat by Silver Sable. She rides around on a motorcycle at high speeds. I think Insomniac had to give her more skills to justify playing as her, along with the two Spider-Men. And yeah, you heard me right, you play as her again. Her stealth sections return, unfortunately. At least they feel more action-heavy and faster-paced, though one plays out like a third-person shooter within a symbiote nest later in the game. I think that one was a step too far gimmicky. While MJ's missions are more interesting than her stealth areas were in the first game, I still don't think they're necessary. You could have easily told her story through cutscenes alone. I also think her character development in Spider-Man 2 leaves a lot to be desired. The whole investigative journalist thing didn't work out for her and didn't really have anywhere to go. She wants to go after the truth, but Jonah at the Daily Bugle only cares about exploitation, so she ends up quitting the Bugle and starts a podcast. That way she can speak her mind, her way. I just hope now, moving forward, she won't run directly into danger like an idiot, but that might be asking a lot. To both Peter and MJ's surprise, their friend Harry Osborn arrives at the house and by some miracle has recovered from his genetic neurological disease that was thought to be terminal. The friendship of these characters is a major focus of this game's story. Peter and Harry's in particular. It's like they've been given a second chance with it. The two would reminisce about their school days. They ride bikes to Midtown High, like they're teenagers again. In Peter's case, he still looks like he's one. You play a flashback that has the two boys sneak into the school after hours during homecoming in search of a thumb drive. You have to avoid being detected by a security guard. I laughed when you got to push a cart into a cutout of star quarterback Flash Thompson. At this point in the timeline, Pete had already been bitten by the radioactive spider. You enter the school's photo lab to grab some additional web fluid he had hidden. I like the sequence in the school. I think playing through a memory of Peter's high school life like this was pretty cool, and not something that's been done before in other Spider-Man games. I just wish he hadn't been made to look like the popular MCU version as much. It makes the whole thing feel less unique. In between these flashbacks, Peter and Harry have broken into the school in the present day and shoot some hoops in the gymnasium. As intruders, thankfully they're not shooting anything else. It's here where you play one of the many useless minigames Spider-Man 2 forces you to sit through, to really just waste time and give you something to fiddle with during an extended dialogue sequence. There's a bunch later at Coney Island. Some of those are entertaining, but I still don't like any of them. I think the worst thing this game has you doing is picking up and throwing away garbage at May's house. What purpose does this have? It's not fun or immersive. Nonsensical fluff. The time wasted on these could have been used to improve other areas of the game that truly needed it. At the end of the school flashback, you witness the moment Harry was picked up by his father Norman and told that his mother Emily had passed. He breaks down in the middle of the football field. In the present, Harry offers Pete a job at his new startup, the Emily May Foundation, named after the two most selfless women they both had ever known. Harry's dream is to heal the world, and his foundation is something branched off of those research stations he had placed throughout the city in the first game. Not only does the Foundation play a role in the story, but you also have side missions you can do for it, involving various experiments with plants, bees, and aquatic life. I found them to be a lot more gratifying and fun than the research stations, mainly because there were far less of them to do. They didn't overstay their welcome. Peter and Miles would go watch over an inmate transfer at the Raft prison, and the ship the supervillains are being boarded onto gets attacked by Kraven the Hunter and his mercenaries. Let's talk Kraven. I didn't realize he was going to be such a prominent figure in this narrative. I'm so used to him being a side villain in video games, but I was more than happy to have him take center stage for the first time in a long time. When done right, Kraven is in my top 5 when it comes to Spider-Man antagonists. Ever since I read Fearful Symmetry, aka Kraven's Last Hunt, when I was younger, I knew how layered he could be. The dark and thought-provoking subject matter he and his stories could contain. When it comes to video games especially, Kraven has been a very one-note character for quite some time. His motivations are always the same. He either comes to New York to hunt Spider-Man for money, or in a few cases, comes to hunt the Lizard and Spider-Man just gets in the way. It's been more or less the same thing now for decades, which is why Marvel Spider-Man 2 is so refreshing. He's been developed in a whole new way that new generations can experience and enjoy, hopefully gaining more respect for him in the process. In Spider-Man 2, Kraven still seeks that challenge, the Great Hunt. He wants to find prey that will be his physical and psychological equal. In his eyes, it's killed or be killed, survival of the fittest. He transforms New York into a literal concrete jungle, goes on the hunt for its various supervillains and superheroes that he feels will pose a worthy challenge for his skills. I like that they gave him and his clan a very militarized and tech-heavy arsenal. It's been cleverly modernized, updated. They utilize these cloaking devices to blend in and remain undetected throughout the city's waterways and rooftops, right in plain view under everyone's noses. It's fucking awesome. They've got Talon drones that resemble hawks or vultures that patrol the skies, and these large mechanical jungle cats on the ground. Despite all of the technological advancements, the game still stays true to Kraven's character. He and his hunters only use crossbows and rifles primarily. Kraven has always been someone who refuses to use firearms when hunting. He views guns as an unfair advantage over an opponent and would much rather kill them with his bare hands, the true test of might and skill. There have been exceptions to this, but much like the game, it's been more primitive early-era firearms, such as rifles or crossbows. He's not mowing down people with Uzis and grenade launchers. None of that shit. So yeah, I think Kraven and his hunters having all this technology was brilliant and helped beef him up for the modern age. Another thing Insomniac did to beef him up was increase his brutality. He breaks necks, enjoys smelling the scent of death on his victims, and has that sick smile on his face, the thrill of the hunt being that intoxicating motivator for him. He views the hunt as his destiny, as if a higher power is deciding which prey he will face and when, and which one will ultimately be capable enough to kill him. I like at the beginning when he's told that Sandman has escaped and cannot be recaptured. Kraven simply sighs and says to his men that he's not the one. Kraven ends up capturing numerous supervillains, meticulously studying each one to learn their strengths, weaknesses, and any other useful personal information about them to aid him in battle. He felt like a genuine threat in this game. He had a true intimidation factor because he succeeds in killing a few noteworthy names, like Shocker, Vulture, and stabs Scorpion with the end of his own tail. The only thing I found puzzling about Kraven's goals here is that he spends far too much time tracking down the enemies of Spider-Man, when the hero himself, the one who has defeated them all time and time again, is the clear apex predator. Kraven only has an interest in Spider-Man when he becomes influenced by the aggressive black symbiote. Before that, it's as if Kraven doesn't view him as much of a threat at all. The game does take elements from the Fearful Symmetry comic in that Kraven is on a time crunch. Rather than just growing older and having lost the fire in him though, he has terminal cancer, refusing to die sick in a bed and instead wants to go out at the hands of an equal. I wish more of the comic had been adapted in this game in new ways though. I don't think this version of Kraven really reaches the heights as he did in that story. Personally, I was hoping for a sequence where Spider-Man was tranquilized and buried underground, having to experience hallucinations and crawl out of his own grave. It had established that potent form of tranquilizer. You had Peter going after Kraven in the rain. There was a church and a cemetery. I think there was a missed opportunity there. It would have made for a memorable story beat that a lot of people would be talking about. Dr. Octopus in Marvel Spider-Man 1 has arguably become the greatest interpretation of that character in my opinion. Kraven had the chance of achieving that same success here, but didn't, falling short. If he had been the main antagonist for the entire duration of the narrative, it might be different. I liked his design and how ruthless they had made him. I think if he had killed all of his supervillain victims on screen, it may have made him look even stronger. I will admit, though, that fighting his hunters did get stale after a while, despite all of the varied archetypes to them. I didn't feel the inner demons from the first game getting as stale as the hunters did here, so maybe it's good that the game's story shifted gears into something else.
I didn't know there were bears in these woods. Okay, before we get down to business, there's something I have to tell you. I'm fresh out of honey.
Back to the inmate transfer. As Peter is outside the ship, removing massive spears Kraven's men have fired into its hull, pulling it closer to shore, Miles goes inside the flooding vessel as it capsizes. He tries to rescue the security personnel and get to the villain Scorpion and Mr. Negative. Miles would get stabbed by Scorpion's tail, and the poison in it causes him to have visions of his father's corpse. And as he's trapped underwater, he hears the voice of his dad laughing at him and telling him to give up. Miles sees his family and friends moving on from him, happy that he's gone from their lives as they are no longer in danger. Miles reaches out for his mom Rio, but the door quickly slams behind her. I think there's kind of a controversial moment that happens here that I think is misinterpreted by some gamers. We see Miles refusing to save Martin Lee, who begins drowning in his cell as it fills with water. Not a very superhero thing to do. Miles is of course bitter over the death of his dad. He wants Lee to suffer for what he's done. How the game handles his vendetta is interesting though. I think it's a believable and understandable thought process for someone to have, especially someone as young and naive as Miles is. Teenagers rarely, if ever, see the bigger picture of these kinds of things. Keep in mind, it's also the same reaction Peter had back in the day towards Uncle Ben's killer. With Miles, all he sees is red when it comes to Martin Lee. As Spider-Man, he puts the lives of innocents in danger in the hopes of hurting him. After the villain escapes, finding Lee becomes Miles' sole focus and his revenge eats away at him. He even puts his education on the back burner, constantly putting off the college application essay he has to write. As terrible as it is to see all of this unfold, and as sour as some people may have gotten towards Miles in this game, realize he does go through the same metamorphosis Peter once did, learning to take on more responsibility, and thankfully he has people around him like his Uncle Aaron and his mother to help him move on and let go of the past. I love how in the end you get a sense that Miles came to his own conclusions. He healed himself. While he doesn't have it in him to forgive Lee for what he's done, he does give him a second chance, believing everyone is entitled to one. He also refuses to carry the burden of hatred anymore, sheds himself of that poison, and shows a lot of growth and maturity for his age. Honestly, I think Miles' arc in Spider-Man 2 is its strongest and most rewarding. Having his Venom powers be intertwined with Mr. Negative's is a nice touch as well. Interacting with the negative energy is what leads Miles into developing his evolved blue Venom powers. So Kraven would start capturing superpowered individuals like Shocker, Scorpion, and Mr. Negative. He also goes after Felicia Hardy, the Black Cat. Miles helps her escape from the Hunters and flee to Paris in this phenomenal chase sequence, with Cat wielding the Wand of Watum she stole from the Sanctum Sanctorum, which opens up portals you swing through. My favorite part of it is when you enter the Arctic temporarily, and Miles says it's freezing cold. I almost felt it too through the TV screen. The Hunters would attack Coney Island in search of Tombstone, who is reformed and has been working as a go-kart mechanic. They capture him, and in the resulting crossfire, Peter has to save a bunch of people stuck on a broken roller coaster. It's here where Peter's identity as Spider-Man is revealed to Harry. We also learn that Harry's special treatment had been an experimental, organic exosuit that has not only cured him of his ailments, but has greatly augmented his strength. Peter and Harry, sporting a costume resembling Flash Thompson's Agent Venom one from the comics, team up to rescue Tombstone in a smelting plant. Afterwards, when they fist bump on a water tower, the symbiote latches on to Peter's arm, and a white spider symbol is formed on the suit's chest. Oscorp scientist Kurt Connors would be abducted by Kraven and taken to an abandoned zoo, with the villain attempting to turn him into an even deadlier version of his lizard alter ego, injecting him in the neck with a newly created serum. Peter, Mary Jane, and Harry would attempt to save Connors, but in the process, Peter would be stabbed and mortally wounded by Kraven in their first ever hand-to-hand confrontation. He dies, but is revived by Harry's exosuit, which slithers its way into his still warm body. Later, Peter tries to give it back, but the symbiote refuses, having taken a liking to its new host. Peter confronts Kraven in a church, steals the antidote for Connors from him, and Kraven also learns that Spider-Man's suit is vulnerable to loud sounds. Some fans have been upset that the only weakness provided for the symbiotes in this game is sound and not fire, but I think that just makes everything more focused. The symbiote's more threatening, and sound has always been the more unique and intriguing of the two weaknesses anyways, in my opinion. Peter goes after Connors, who has transformed into the Lizard. He investigates the Connors family home. I like how it has a secret lab you must discover, and a panic room to protect his loved ones for those times he grows big and scaly. I really enjoy the Lizard sequences in this game. They take on a horror aspect to them. There are a few jump scares and freaky noises when you're on the trail of him. As Miles, you find some of the Lizard shed skin, which is disgusting. I wish the size of the fully grown Lizard had been kept a secret through all of the trailers and marketing for the game, though. It would have been a nice surprise in that initial playthrough. The battle you have with the Lizard in the sewers is great. I think his design in Marvel Spider-Man 2 is the most frightening we've ever had outside the comics. As lifelike as the large naked reptilian monster thing has been in recent years, though, I can't be the only one in saying I've missed the old lab coat and purple pants the character used to wear. I think we're about due for a resurgence of that. You end up chasing the Lizard through the streets of New York, up the sides of buildings with vehicles blowing up, and Kraven shoots him with exploding crossbow bolts which cause the Lizard to fall. One of the bolts sticks into his tail too, and it's blown off. Grody. You land in the sewers again, and another battle is triggered, and Spider-Man is able to inject Connors with the antidote and save him. Afterwards, in another one of his labs, Connors explains what the black suit covering Spider-Man really is. It's an alien symbiote that had been found by Oscorp several years prior. It had latched onto Connors and is the reason he lost his arm, something I found to be a bit contrived, but whatever. Peter's suit would go through a transformation appearance-wise, looking more sinister with spikier legs on the spider symbol. I love how this game takes its time with the symbiote, how gradual everything surrounding it is. The suit has multiple stages to it. The moving textures on it make it look so much more alive than past ones we've seen. You really get a firm understanding of not only its visual evolution on screen, but how it's been negatively influencing Peter's behavior the longer it is bonded with him. He snaps at Miles, thinking he's incompetent as Spider-Man. He's rude to MJ, refuses to take calls from people, particularly Miles' mother after Miles gets kidnapped by Kraven. Straight up, Pete becomes a disrespectful asshole. You really begin to hate the prick, and Yuri Lowenthal's performance is great in the game. The anger and rage he brings to his voice elevates all of it. Like I said, Kraven would capture Miles. Finding your way out of the Hunter's cages and prison fortress was really cool. Kraven would force Miles to fight Mr. Negative to the death. Thankfully, Miles would overcome his anger towards Lee and help him escape so he can find the OG Spider-Man. When Peter arrives to save Miles, corrupted by the suit, he tries to kill Kraven. Before Peter can cross that line, Miles would intervene and the two Spider-Mans would clash. This boss battle is definitely one of the more emotionally charged in the story. Miles has to help Peter overcome the symbiote and remove it with the help of the church bell Kraven had stolen from earlier. Using it to weaken the aggressive alien during the battle is a lot of fun too. After trapping the symbiote, Peter would return it to Dr. Connors at Oscorp. Harry had grown sick again, dying from his disease, and had become extremely bitter towards Peter, questioning their friendship, why he would abandon him and doom Harry to his fate. Harry would reclaim the symbiote, and the two would combine to form Venom, voiced expertly by Tony Todd in this game, making the character sound scary again. It's been a while since Venom's voice and overall presence has done that for me.
Just give me back my son. We are your son. Look at us. We are healthy, strong. This is what you wanted, isn't it?
I think making Harry Osborn Venom in this game instead of Eddie Brock was a nice change of pace. It chose to do something different, and I admire it for that. I love the layers of complexity to it. Harry has this hopeless illness, with death waiting for him around every corner. His friendship with Harry is fractured. There's distrust that builds between them. Harry has these overwhelming feelings of powerlessness and hopelessness, not being able to be the hero he wants to be, the kind of heroes his friends get to be. He's left to die on the sidelines with his dreams of grandeur. His father Norman treated Peter like a son, the healthy son he never had. Harry senses that he's replaceable, like his life doesn't matter. It's devastating stuff. Of course, Harry had no idea what the symbiote had been doing to Peter's mind. When Peter tells him the dangers of the creature, Harry doesn't want to hear it. All he sees is the one thing capable of saving his life. Time is a luxury he does not possess. Breaking the container open is an act of desperation from him, a matter of life or death. You get to play as Venom in a lengthy sequence breaking out of Oscorp. The way you leap around, throw guys into the air like they're nothing, smack them with your tendrils, and snap their spines like spaghetti noodles gave me Ultimate Spider-Man vibes. Some of the animations were clearly inspired by that game from way back in 2005. I remember when it was new. I'm getting so fucking old. Then again, there'll come a day when this game is considered a relic too. That's how this shit works. You'll see. Your onslaught leads you outside into Times Square where you face off with Kraven. You finally provide the hunter peace by killing him, eating his head. Kraven's necklace falls into a pool of blood. Venom's mouth and hands are covered in it. You've got the rain coming down. It was more graphic than what I was expecting. The Venom symbiote would twist Harry's desire to heal the world by wanting to create a planet of symbiotes, starting with New York. The city gets covered with black symbiote growths on and between many of its buildings as hundreds, if not thousands, of civilians are transformed into horrifying colored symbiote monstrosities. This late phase of the game takes elements from the Planet of the Symbiotes comic storyline from the mid-1990s, as well as the video game Web of Shadows from 2008. Remember that one? Maybe I'll review it someday. Venom would attack Mary Jane at May's house and infect her with the yellow and red symbiote Scream, something I was not expecting from this game at all. Peter manages to break her free of its control. It had been feeding on her frustrations regarding her job and how Peter makes everything in their lives revolve around Spider-Man. But who could blame him? MJ needs to get off her high horse for a second. Peter and Miles would endlessly battle wave after wave of symbiotes infecting the city. One of the side missions has you destroying several nests by planting sonic burst gadgets onto these growths coming out of the ground, and defending them long enough until they go off, eradicating all of the symbiotes in the area. It's around this time, too, that Miles uses sound mixing to create a frequency strong enough to hurt the symbiotes. That I find funny. Seems like an easy solution anyone could achieve with a simple app on their phone. It's like the glasses of water with the aliens from Signs. Okay, maybe not that bad. Peter would still have trace elements of the black symbiote inside his body, and with the help of Miles and Mr. Negative, he is able to control it. The two enter his mind and his heart, finding that Peter is guilty over the death of his Aunt May, and the supervillains he has had locked away over the years. He wishes he could rehabilitate each and every one, and that sometimes he thinks maybe a cell isn't strong enough to stop their evil. Maybe they should be killed. The symbiote had given him the unrestrained power needed to get the job done. Lee's negative energy in combination with Miles's venom powers cleanses Peter's body of the black symbiote and turns it into the white and black anti-venom symbiote, which is just as powerful but doesn't possess any of the corrupting side effects. It gives you access to even more epic abilities and makes taking out the other symbiote monsters a breeze from this point onwards. When anti-venom made an appearance, it was something else in this game I was not expecting. Insomniac were firing on all cylinders with their symbiote story. I think it's one of the best we've ever had. Nails just about every head you'd want it to. After helping Peter, which appears to have drained most, if not all, of his negative energy, Martin Lee turns himself into police. I love how his good side prevails in Spider-Man 2. He gets a nice redemption arc. Venom would recover the meteorite that brought it to Earth and plan on using it to increase in power and accelerate its symbiote invasion. The endgame of Spider-Man 2 from a gameplay perspective with the various battles you have with Venom back-to-back, totaling 3 or 4, is great. They're made a lot more engaging challenge-wise than the boss fight you had with Doc Ock in the first game. I love how you engage him in elevated and destroyed parts of Midtown High, the basketball court and football field. Venom also grows a set of wings and looks like a bat from hell. A really cool concept and design. Has this ever been done before? The boss battles with Venom are stronger than Doc Ock's lone one in Spider-Man 1. Venom's is a drawn-out war with multiple stages to it, but I don't think it has the same levels of raw emotion the first game had in its climax. That ending sequence in Spider-Man 1 is kind of impossible to surpass, in my opinion. Peter and Miles are able to destroy the meteorite with the particle accelerator at the Emily May Foundation, which kills all of the symbiotes, including Venom. Harry also dies, but is resuscitated by Miles's venom electricity. However, he is left in a coma. Norman would arrive and find Harry in the arms of the Spider-Men. He is enraged over what has happened and demands to know what they did to his boy, a nice switcheroo from what had happened in the Sam Raimi films with Harry. Marvel Spider-Man 2 further develops the relationship between Harry and his father, played once again by Mark Rolston. Throughout the early parts of the story, Norman is delighted at the sight of his son reconnecting with his childhood friends. All he wants is for Harry to be happy and healthy. He clearly has a lot of respect for Peter because his son respects Peter. Norman will always consider him family. Norman did everything in his power to save Harry. He couldn't bear losing him like he lost his wife. He had performed numerous risky experiments on his son in an attempt to cure him, from the Devil's Breath fiasco in the first game to now bonding him with an alien life form, essentially turning him into a monster. You see the frustration build in him when all these efforts fail, how it breaks him down psychologically. Though Harry had made it clear to his father that he wanted a chance to say goodbye to his friends if the stasis tank treatment didn't work, Norman would keep Harry there against his wishes, because he has a sense of security when he's in there, knows nothing out here can get to him. Late in the game, when Dr. Connors tells Spider-Man that Harry is too far gone and must be killed to stop the symbiote, Norman refuses to admit the odds, holding on to hope, and asks Spider-Man to do everything in his power to save him. Now, since he has lost Harry all over again, Norman has grown angry. He snaps at Harry's bedside, breaks shit, scares Peter and MJ into awkwardly leaving, and of course blames Spider-Man for his son's condition. We hear Norman ask his men to prepare the G serum, which has me believe he will become the Green Goblin in Marvel Spider-Man 3. Though Spider-Man 2 falls a little short of the mark, I think the next game has the potential of becoming the greatest superhero story ever in a Marvel video game. Possibly one of the greatest Spider-Man stories ever told, period. I can just imagine how personal the story can be, the kind of tragic loss it can depict fueled by revenge. And the ending of Spider-Man 2 has Norman meet up with his old partner Otto Octavius in prison. He asks him for the identity of Spider-Man. I'm sure they're going to reconcile their differences to achieve a common goal, go after a common enemy. Having a story of this scale, featuring arguably the two best Spider-Man villains there's ever been, is a recipe for perfection. I cannot fucking wait. Insomniac, show us what you're made of. Marvel Spider-Man 2 is a great Spider-Man game all around. I love the enhancements made to its combat system, the traversal, and obviously, from a tech standpoint, it's incredibly impressive. One of the greatest and most gorgeous-looking superhero games that's ever been released. While I find the game's story to be less impactful than the first game's, I do still like the elements drawn from Kraven's Last Hunt, and all of the symbiote stuff in it is superb. If Carnage is to be in Spider-Man 3, I hope he's just a side villain. I don't think we need to focus on too many of the symbiotes again, following this game's expert handling of them, though it would be cool to see the Carnage symbiote bond with some of the other villains like Green Goblin or Dr. Octopus like it did in the old PS1 game. That'd be a neat callback, wouldn't it? Anyways, that's gonna do it for this review. I hope you enjoyed watching it and listening to me ramble. Let me know your thoughts on Marvel Spider-Man 2 down in the comment section below. If you'd like to support the channel and help me grow, think about subscribing, hitting that bell icon for notifications, sharing my videos to anyone you know who would get a kick out of them, and become a producer over on Patreon if you can. I will see you all in next week's video. Take care of yourselves, and always stay nerdy.